A poor mother couldn't afford her daughter's birthday cake until a rough biker stopped his Harley, saw everything, and did something no one expected. Watch till the end to see the miracle unfold, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of kindness and redemption. The rain came in fine, slanting needles, soft but endless, turning the narrow street of old brick stores into a blurred watercolor of grey and amber light. The hour was nearly dusk. Neon signs flickered over half-closed shops, their hum mixing with the hiss of passing tires. The smell of wet asphalt carried the faint sweetness of baked bread from a small pastry shop on the corner of Maple and Ninth. Lena walked slowly with her daughter Ellie, her shoes soaked through, her coat, once beige, now dulled by time and rain. Lena was 29 but looked older, her frame thin from months of restless nights and little food. Her face was pale, with soft freckles near the bridge of her nose, and eyes the color of faded moss, gentle, exhausted, but refusing to lose their warmth. Strands of chestnut hair stuck to her cheeks where the rain had glued them down. Once, long ago, she had been a student of art, a painter who believed colors could fix the world. But poverty and motherhood had taken the brushes from her hands and replaced them with a mop and calloused palms. Beside her, 5-year-old Ellie skipped in small steps to avoid the puddles. She was a tiny creature of light blonde curls plastered to her forehead, blue eyes bright and curious despite the chill. She wore a pink jacket too small for her, its zipper broken halfway. In her right hand, she held a paper cup half filled with cold chocolate milk from a charity stall they had passed earlier. She didn't complain about the cold or the hunger. She never did. When they reached the bakery, Ellie stopped so suddenly that Lena almost bumped into her. The glass window was fogged by the warmth inside. On the other side sat a cake, 3 layers of soft sponge, thick white cream spiraling upward, topped with strawberries so red they seemed to glow against the dull rain. 5 golden candles stood straight, waiting for a match. The lights above made the frosting shine like marble. Ellie's breath fogged the glass as she pressed her nose to it. "Mommy," she whispered, "look, it's perfect." Lena's chest tightened. She stared at the cake, then at her daughter's reflection, then at her own 2 blurred shapes in the misty pane. She reached into her coat pocket, feeling the soft crinkle of worn bills. $7, a handful of coins. It would buy bread and soup for the next 2 days. The price tag below the cake read $38. Her smile trembled. "Maybe next year, sweetheart." Ellie turned, confused but not angry, her blue eyes full of a kind of patient hope that only children can manage. "It's okay, Mummy," she said softly, though her gaze lingered on the cake. The bell above the bakery door jingled as a couple stepped out, laughing, sheltering their box under an umbrella. The scent of sugar and vanilla spilled onto the sidewalk. Lena breathed it in like a punishment. Across the street, under the awning of a gas station, a man watched. He leaned against a black Harley-Davidson, one boot propped on the curb, cigarette glowing between his fingers. His name was Jack Lawson, though most people on the road called him Hell Angel. At 38, he was broad-shouldered, tall, with skin tanned by sun and highway dust. His hair was dark brown, cut short but rough around the edges. A faint streak of grey traced his temple. A trimmed beard followed the line of his jaw, strong and square. His leather vest, patched with an emblem of wings and fire, carried the smell of oil and rain. There was a quiet gravity about him, the kind found in men who have lost more than they speak of. Jack had grown up the son of a truck driver and a mother who left when he was 10. His father drowned himself in beer and engine grease, leaving the boy to learn early that affection wasn't free. Years of drifting through fights, broken clubs, and long stretches of highway had carved into him a rough kindness, the kind that hides behind silence. He wasn't cruel. He was simply tired of pretending to care about things he couldn't fix. But as he watched that small girl press her face to the glass, something broke through the armor. He flicked his cigarette into the gutter and exhaled. Damn it. The sight of them, the woman in a soaked coat, The little girl holding an empty cup cut deeper than he expected. He told himself to look away, to start the engine and leave, but he couldn't. The rain drummed on the metal roof of the gas station, a slow heartbeat. The child's reflection shimmered on the wet asphalt like a ghost from another time, and Jack saw himself 10 years old, standing outside a diner, waiting for a mother who never came back. Lena tugged gently on her daughter's sleeve. "We should go, Ellie." "But, Mommy, can't we just look a little longer?" Lena's throat tightened. "If we look too long, it'll hurt," she whispered, more to herself than to the child. She took Ellie's hand and led her away. Their footsteps splashed through shallow puddles, fading into the rhythm of the rain. Jack stood motionless until they turned the corner. He stared at the empty spot where they had stood, the glow of the bakery window reflecting off his wet motorcycle helmet. Something inside him stirred an ache he thought the road had long buried. He ran a hand through his wet hair, muttering under his breath. He remembered the last birthday he'd had 13 years old, a slice of stale bread with a candle stolen from a bar counter. His father had been passed out on the couch, a bottle of whiskey tipped beside him. Jack had blown the candle out anyway, not for a wish, but for silence. The memory crawled back now, unwanted. He shoved it away, swung a leg over his Harley, and turned the key. The engine growled awake, echoing through the narrow street. But even over the thunder of metal, he could still hear the faint echo of the little girl's voice. "It's perfect." Jack pulled out of the gas station, following the direction they'd gone, though he told himself he was just riding home. The rain softened as he turned onto a side street, lined with old apartment blocks and shuttered shops. Halfway down, he caught sight of them again, Lena and Ellie, standing under a broken awning near a bus stop. The girl was laughing at something her mother said, her breath turning to mist in the cold air. Lena's laughter, though faint, had a softness that startled him. He slowed the bike to a crawl, watching as they crossed the street and disappeared into a narrow alley that led toward the abandoned part of town. The alley was dark, filled with rusted dumpsters and graffiti that had long lost their color. Jack stopped at the corner, engine idling, torn between reason and impulse. He'd always kept to his rule, don't get involved. But there was something in the way the woman had held her daughter's hand, something unyielding in her fragility. It reminded him of his mother before she left kind eyes, shaking hands, trying to smile through storms she couldn't control. The bike rumbled beneath him like a restless heart. Finally, he cursed softly, turned the throttle, and drove off, not home, not far, just enough to think. The city lights blurred into streaks on his visor. Back at his small apartment above the garage, the sound of rain hitting the metal roof wouldn't let him sleep. The image of the child's face, pressed against the glass, kept flashing behind his eyelids. He turned on the old radio, but every song seemed to hum the same melancholy tune. He walked to his workbench, cluttered with spare parts, chrome pieces, and a dusty bottle of bourbon. He poured a shot, didn't drink it. His eyes fell on a small tin box in the corner inside, a single photograph. Him and his mother at a carnival, before everything went wrong. She was smiling, holding a paper cone of cotton candy. He was laughing, face smudged with sugar. The photo edges were cracked, but her eyes still shone. Jack placed the photo back in the box, shut it, and sighed. He'd spent years on the road, collecting regrets like miles on the odometer. Maybe one good deed wouldn't fix anything, but maybe it could make the world a little less cruel for someone else. He looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The streetlights shimmered on puddles like scattered coins. Somewhere out there, a little girl was sleeping without a birthday cake. Jack's jaw tightened. He picked up his helmet, the reflection of the streetlights flickering across its visor. "Tomorrow," he muttered to himself, voice low but steady. "Tomorrow, I'll find them." He switched off the light, leaving the room in silence, except for the soft ticking of a cooling engine below. The night wrapped around the city like a damp blanket, and for the first time in years, Jack Lawson felt something unfamiliar stirring under the leather and scars a purpose. Morning came grey and heavy, the sky still swollen with the memory of last night's rain. Jack Lawson stood outside the gas station where he often refueled, the smell of damp asphalt mixing with the bitter scent of his coffee. He wasn't a man used to caring about much. He preferred engines to people, steel to sentiment. But that morning, he found himself asking questions he'd never thought he'd care to ask. The station clerk, a lanky man named Randy Cooper, was in his mid-30s, with a mop of red hair, a grin always half-crooked, and a voice that carried a lazy southern drawl. Randy had once been a trucker before an accident shattered his knee, and now he spent his days wiping pumps and watching the world go by. Jack leaned on the counter. "You ever see a woman and a little girl round here?" "Brown coat, blonde kid, maybe 5 years old." Randy raised an eyebrow. "You mean the lady who hangs around the old playground near Riverside Park?" "Yeah, seen her a few times. Real quiet type. Folks say she's been staying in one of them abandoned shelters by the swings." "Why, you know her?" Jack shook his head, but his jaw flexed. "Not really," Randy smirked. "You're a strange man, Lawson. You spend 10 years riding with no one but your shadow, and now you're playing guardian angel to some homeless mom? Hell's getting chilly." Jack ignored the tease, tossing a few bills on the counter for coffee before striding out. The Harley gleamed under the pale daylight, raindrops still clinging to its chrome. He ran a gloved hand along the tank, thinking. That child's face kept flashing behind his eyes, the look of longing, the quiet acceptance. He'd seen too many kids crushed by life's indifference. Maybe, just this once, he could tilt the scale a little. Back at Iron Wing's garage, the air smelled of grease, gasoline, and faint traces of whiskey. The garage sat on the edge of town, a converted hangar with wide metal doors and a tattoo's flickering sign shaped like a winged skull. Inside, half a dozen men worked around scattered bikes and tool benches. The first to notice Jack was Miguel Alvarez, a stout man in his 40s with thick black hair tied in a short ponytail, arms covered in tattoos of Aztec serpents and saints. Miguel was Jack's oldest friend, former Marine, tough as steel, but with a soft spot for stray cats and hopeless cases. "You look like hell, hermano," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Did you lose a fight or find a reason to smile?" "Neither," Jack muttered. "I need a favor." That phrase, "I need a favor," was enough to make every wrench in the room pause mid-turn. Jack wasn't the type to ask. Within minutes, the crew gathered around. Tommy Briggs, the youngest of the bunch, only 22, skinny but sharp-eyed. Old Ben, a grey-bearded veteran of every road between Arizona and Montana. And Hank, a man built like a refrigerator with a laugh that could shake dust off the ceiling. Jack told them, in his rough way, about the woman and the little girl, about the rain and the cake. He didn't mention how the sight had clawed at something deep inside him he didn't need to. The silence in the garage carried its own understanding. Tommy was the first to speak. "So, you're saying we throw a birthday party? For a stranger?" Jack shrugged. "She's not a stranger anymore." Miguel grinned. "I like it. Haven't had an excuse to use those Christmas lights in a year." And just like that, the plan formed. Miguel and Hank volunteered to pick up decorations, balloons, streamers, a few ribbons they'd find at the dollar store. Tommy offered to handle the food, whatever cake was left in the bakery before closing, maybe some sodas and chips. Jack would take care of inviting them if he could find them again. By late afternoon, the garage had transformed. The motorcycles were pushed aside, and an old work table had been wiped down and covered, with a tarp that served as a makeshift tablecloth. Strings of colored lights hung unevenly across the beams, flickering like fireflies. A small radio played soft blues. In the center sat a modest cake vanilla, with pink frosting and 6 candles stuck in at odd angles. It wasn't perfect, but it was more beautiful than anything money could buy. As the others worked, Miguel caught Jack staring at the cake. "You sure about this?" Jack's lips curved in a rare half-smile. "Never been sure about anything in my life, but this feels right." When the sky began to dim, he rode back toward Riverside Park. The playground stood empty, the swings squeaking in the wind. Near a rusted bench, he spotted them, Lena, sitting with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, sketching on a piece of paper, while Ellie drew shapes in the dirt with a stick. The sight of them against the dying light struck him like poetry carved out of sorrow. He cut the engine and approached slowly so as not to startle them. Ellie looked up first, wide-eyed. "Mommy, it's the man from the gas place." Lena stood quickly, protective instinct flaring. "Can I help you?" Jack removed his helmet, rain-dark hair clinging to his temples. "Name's Jack Lawson. I work down at Iron Wing's garage. Could use a hand cleaning up the place, pays cash. You interested?" Lena hesitated, studying him. The leather vest, the scars on his knuckles, the smell of engine oil. He looked every bit the kind of man she'd been warned to avoid. But his eyes, grey with a trace of blue, held no threat, only sincerity, and maybe something broken. She nodded. "I'll come by tomorrow morning." "Good," he said, then paused. "Actually, it'd be easier tonight. We're working late, and it's warm inside. Bring the kid." Ellie looked up hopefully. "Can I, Mummy?" Lena hesitated only a second before agreeing. When they arrived, the garage lights glowed golden against the night. The metal door screeched open, and inside, Ellie froze. Balloons hung from the ceiling, clumsy but colorful. The men stood grinning awkwardly, and in the middle of it all sat the cake. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then Jack, trying not to look foolish, cleared his throat. "Happy birthday, kiddo." Ellie's face lit up. "For me?" Miguel laughed. "You see any other princess around here?" The room erupted in laughter. Hank struck a match and lit the candles, their flames dancing in the draught. The radio crackled, switching to an old rock ballad. Jack crouched down to her height. "Go on, make a wish." Ellie squeezed her eyes shut, whispered something only she could hear, and blew. The candles flickered out in one breath, the smoke curling like small ghosts toward the ceiling. Everyone cheered. Lena stood still at the doorway, overwhelmed. Her eyes glistened as she took in the scene, the rough men clapping, the smell of cake and gasoline mingling in the air, her daughter's laughter echoing through the vast space. For months, life had been nothing but survival. Now, in the most unlikely place, a biker garage, it felt, for one fragile heartbeat, like home. Jack watched her quietly. Something in her face reminded him of sunlight after too many cloudy days. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, he never did, but tonight he had done something that mattered. When the laughter faded and the cake was gone, Ellie sat on an overturned tire, icing smudged on her cheeks, fast asleep in her mother's lap. Lena looked up at Jack. "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged. "Because nobody ever did it for me." Outside, the night settled, calm and damp, and from the open garage door, the sound of the rain returned, gentle this time, almost like applause. The midday sun pressed down on the city like molten brass, baking the cracked pavement and turning the air into a slow, heavy current that shimmered above the road. Jack Lawson sat astride his Harley at a long red light, the engine humming beneath him like a restless heart. The smell of fuel, hot rubber, and cheap street tacos drifted through the intersection. He had just finished a delivery run for a client and was heading back to the Iron Wings garage when something familiar caught his eye near the curb. A slender woman in a faded brown coat was moving between cars, wiping windshields with a ragged towel. Her steps were tired but steady, her motions practiced and precise. Sweat beaded along her temples, glinting in the harsh light. It took Jack a moment to recognize her. It was Lena. She looked smaller under the weight of the sun, her cheeks pale against the heat, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. There was a faint tear in her sleeve, and her shoes were still damp from the previous night's rain. Every few cars, someone would roll their window down and hand her a few coins, sometimes with a nod, sometimes without even looking at her. At the corner, a man in a silver sedan rolled his window halfway down, sneering. "Don't smear it, lady. I just had it detailed." His tone carried that careless cruelty that comes too easily to those who've never gone hungry. Lena murmured an apology, wiping the glass carefully, her voice soft and level. Jack's hand tightened on the handlebar. He could feel the heat crawl up his neck, not from the weather, but from something darker. She was working herself raw in the middle of traffic, while men like that tossed her dignity around like spare change. He revved the engine once, the Harley's growl splitting through the noise of the intersection. The driver startled and drove off as the light turned green, tires squealing. Jack pulled up beside Lena as she finished another windshield. The sunlight glared off the page, chrome of his bike, making him look almost otherworldly, black leather vest gleaming, a streak of silver in his hair catching the light, tattoos wrapping around his forearms like winding rivers. His eyes, grey and sharp beneath the shadow of his helmet, softened when she turned toward him. "Not exactly a safe job," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. Lena straightened, squinting against the sun. "Safe doesn't feed my kid," she replied simply, and kept working, her towel moving in small circles on the glass of an old pickup. Jack cut the engine and removed his helmet. "There are better ways to earn cash." She glanced at him, suspicion flickering behind her tired green eyes. "If you're offering advice, I've heard enough of it this week." He smirked faintly. "Not advice, a job." That made her pause. He reached into his vest and pulled out a card creased, oil-stained, the logo of Iron Wings Garage printed in faded black ink. "I need someone to help clean the shop. Floors, benches, maybe run the coffee pot. Cash pay, end of each day." Lena hesitated, looking at the card as though it were both salvation and danger. "Why me?" Jack shrugged. "Because you work hard. I saw you cleaning cars in the rain the other night." Her lips parted slightly. "You followed us?" He looked away, embarrassed. "Just made sure you got home safe." For a long second, neither spoke. The traffic around them moved like a slow tide of metal and heat. Then Lena nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "All right, I'll come by." "Tomorrow morning," Jack said. "8 sharp. Tell 'em Lawson sent you." She studied him again, weighing his words, his tone, the calluses on his hands. Then she pocketed the card. "Thank you." He started the engine, the Harley roaring back to life. "Don't thank me yet," he said over the noise. "It's a greasy job." As he pulled away, he caught a glimpse of her. Reflection in the side mirror, standing still, one hand shading her eyes, the other clutching the small piece of card like a secret she wasn't sure she should trust. That evening, back at the garage, Jack found Miguel tuning a carburetor and Tommy sweeping the floor. The sun had begun to set, pouring orange light through the open doors. Miguel gave him a look as he dismounted. "You've got that face again," he said, smirking. "The one you had when you brought that stray dog last winter." Jack scowled. "This one's human. Better housebroken, I hope," Tommy joked from the corner. "She's the woman from the party," Jack said flatly, ignoring them. "The kid's mother." Miguel's grin faded. "She all right?" "She's cleaning windshields at stoplights," Jack replied, grabbing a rag and wiping the oil from his hands. "Said she'll come by tomorrow. Give her the small broom, the one that's not busted." Tommy nodded. "You really think she'll show?" Jack looked toward the fading horizon. "Yeah, she's not the type to break her word." Later that night, Lena sat with Ellie in their small shelter behind the park, a hollowed-out maintenance shed with a broken door. The air inside was warm and thick with the smell of damp wood. Ellie was humming quietly to herself, drawing shapes on a scrap of cardboard with a dull pencil. "Mommy," she asked suddenly, "who was that man on the motorcycle?" Lena hesitated. "A mechanic. He offered me work." "Is he nice?" Lena thought of the way he'd spoken, gruff, impatient, but without cruelty. "He seems decent." Ellie smiled. "He looked like someone from a story." "What story?" "The one where angels ride in the rain." Lena laughed softly, brushing her daughter's hair back. You and your stories. But as she lay awake later, listening to Ellie's breathing, she couldn't shake the image, the roaring motorcycle, the grey-eyed man offering a way out. The next morning, the air was cool, the smell of rain still lingering in the streets. Lena arrived at Iron Wings just before 8. The garage loomed like a beast of steel and light, its sign flickering faintly in the morning haze. She hesitated at the threshold, heart thudding. Inside, Jack was pouring coffee. Miguel looked up first, smiling warmly. "You must be Lena. Jack said you'd come." She nodded. Miguel's appearance was disarming, his heavy build and tattooed arms contrasted with eyes so gentle they looked almost out of place in a biker's face. "Grab a rag, Senora," he said cheerfully. "The kingdom of Greece awaits." As she stepped in, her shoes squeaked against the concrete floor. The place smelled of oil, leather, and burnt coffee. There were bikes everywhere, some stripped bare, others gleaming like wild animals ready to run. Tommy waved from across the room, grinning. "Don't mind the mess. It's cleaner than it looks." Jack handed her a broom. "Start wherever you want." She took it, gripping the handle firmly, and for the first time in months felt something close to belonging, a job, a rhythm, a chance. Jack watched her sweep, her movements careful but steady. Miguel nudged him. "You got a good heart, brother," he said quietly. Jack shook his head. "No, just tired of watching people drown while I've got a boat." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the chrome of the motorcycles until they gleamed like mirrors. Inside, for the first time, the Iron Wings garage hummed not only with the sound of engines, but with the faint promise of change. The morning light streamed through the wide garage doors in pale ribbons, cutting through the haze of oil fumes and dust motes floating lazily in the air. Iron Wings garage had its own rhythm, the clang of wrenches, the thud of boots on concrete, the low hum of engines waiting to wake. Lena had been working there for 2 weeks now, and though her job was humble, she carried it out with quiet devotion. She swept floors, folded rags, wiped down benches, and brewed coffee that was often too strong but always warm. Her hands, once delicate, had grown used to the sting of cleaning solution, but her spirit, resilient and soft-spoken, had begun to find its footing again. Lena's presence brought a strange calm to the place. Even Miguel, usually loud and teasing, found himself lowering his voice when she was nearby. The men respected her silence. It wasn't born of fear or submission, but of focus. Every task she did, whether scrubbing grease from a wrench or organizing bolts by size, she did with the precision of someone trying to put order back into a life that had once fallen apart. Each afternoon, after finishing her small art classes at the local charity center, Ellie would arrive. The little girl would burst through the garage doors, bringing sunlight with her. Her blonde hair always carried a faint scent of chalk and crayons, and she'd plop down on an overturned tire in the corner with a sketch pad. The bikers adored her. Even Hank, the burly giant who once scared children just by breathing, had been seen carefully handing her a bottle of orange soda once. Jack, meanwhile, pretended not to notice how the mood in the garage shifted whenever the two arrived. He'd grunt his greetings, focusing on the bikes, though his eyes followed them more than he'd admit. For years, Iron Wings had been a fortress for outcasts and wanderers, a place where broken men mended machines, not hearts. But lately, something about Lena's presence made the air lighter, the laughter easier. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted everything gold, Jack heard soft humming coming from the far corner. He turned and saw Ellie sitting cross-legged beside her mother's small work table, coloring something with fierce concentration. Lena was bent over a bucket nearby, wringing out a rag. Jack walked closer, wiping his hands on a towel. "What are you working on, kiddo?" Ellie looked up with that fearless honesty only children have. "It's Mommy's drawing," she said, showing him the page, a rough pencil sketch of a Harley-Davidson with wings of flame spreading from its sides. The lines were bold and confident, but unfinished. Jack raised a brow. "That's not bad. Who taught you that?" "Mummy did." Ellie's voice was proud. "She used to draw a lot. Before." She trailed off, glancing at her mother. Lena looked up, caught off guard. A faint blush touched her cheeks. "Before life got busy," she said softly. Jack leaned against a workbench. "You studied art?" She hesitated, then nodded. "For 2 years. Fine arts, at community college. I wanted to paint murals, big ones, on walls or maybe theaters. But then I had Ellie. Her father left before she was born. I tried to work and study, but dreams don't pay rent." Jack said nothing at first. His gaze drifted to the half-finished motorcycles around them, metal skeletons waiting for purpose. "Dreams don't pay rent," he repeated quietly, "but they sure as hell make life worth the trouble." He walked to the corner and picked up a spare gas tank, dented on one side, stripped of paint. He placed it gently on her work table. "Here," he said, tapping the metal. "Try something. If it turns out like crap, I'll sand it off myself." Lena blinked, uncertain. "You want me to paint this? I haven't done anything serious in years." "Good," Jack said. "Then you're due. Over the next few days, in between sweeping floors and making coffee, Lena worked on the tank. She was nervous at first, her hands trembling slightly as she held the brush. The smell of enamel paint filled the corner she worked in, blending with oil and gasoline until the air became a strange symphony of color and grit. Ellie often sat nearby, watching her mother bring the vision to life, orange and crimson flames licking upward from a base of deep black, merging into a pair of angelic wings, spreading wide across the metal surface. The wings weren't perfect, they carried rough edges, but there was something fierce and tender in them, a reflection of the artist herself. Miguel stopped by on the 3rd day, peering over her shoulder. "Damn, Chica," he said softly, "that's not art, that's resurrection." Jack didn't say much when he passed. He'd pause, glance once, then return to work, though his jaw would tighten ever so slightly, a habit he had when trying to hide pride. By the 5th day, the piece was finished. Under the harsh fluorescent light, the wings blazed like living fire. The reds shifted to gold when you moved, the black background drinking in every reflection. The other bikers gathered around silently, their usual rowdy energy replaced by a reverent awe. Tommy whistled low. "That thing looks like it could fly right off the shelf." Even Hank, who rarely spoke, muttered, "Never seen metal look alive before." Lena stepped back, wiping a smear of paint from her cheek. Her heart pounded not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. For the first time in years, she'd created something beautiful again. Jack approached last, his boots echoing in the quiet. He traced the air near the tank, not touching it. "It's fire and grace," he said finally. "That's what a real ride should feel like." Lena smiled faintly. "I just painted what I see when I look at your bikes." Jack tilted his head. "You see angels in grease and metal." She met his gaze. "I see freedom." The words hung between them, heavy and soft. That night, when the garage emptied and the others left for drinks, Jack stayed behind. He stood in front of the painted tank, the only light coming from a flickering bulb overhead. The flames seemed to move in the shifting shadows. For a long time, he simply looked then. With careful hands, he lifted the tank and mounted it onto his Harley. When the bolts tightened and the fit was perfect, he sat back and exhaled. The machine looked reborn. The angelic wings gleamed beneath the dim light, reflecting off his weathered face. He started the engine once the roar filled the night, echoing down the empty street. It was more than a sound. It was a heartbeat, shared between man, metal, and something unseen. The next morning, when Lena arrived, she found him waiting by the open door, the motorcycle parked proudly in front. "Take a look," he said. Her eyes widened. "You put it on your bike?" Jack nodded. "Couldn't let it sit in a corner. Some things belong on the road." She smiled then, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. And in that moment, Jack realized that maybe freedom wasn't just the open highway. Maybe it was the courage to let someone else change what you thought was already complete. From that day, word spread. Riders who visited Iron Wings began asking about the angel painter. Orders came in for custom designs, flames, skulls, saints, stories carved in color. Lena's small corner of the garage became a studio, cluttered with paints and rags instead of dust and despair. And every evening, when Ellie skipped around between the motorcycles and Jack pretended to scold her for touching the tools, the place felt a little less like a garage and a little more like home. The night had settled heavy over the Iron Wings garage, a blanket of stillness broken only by the occasional drip of rain from the eaves and the faint ticking of cooling engines. The place smelled of oil, metal, and faint traces of turpentine from Lena's corner, where a half-finished tank design glimmered under a single hanging bulb. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. The laughter, the music, the clang of tools, all of it had quieted, leaving only the hum of silence that wrapped the place in solitude. Jack Lawson sat on the concrete step outside, his back against the cold steel of the door. The night wind carried the scent of distant rain and the faint hum of the highway beyond the trees. He was still in his work vest, though he had long since removed his gloves. His hands, calloused, scarred, and smudged with ink from checking bike orders, rested loosely on his knees as he stared at the asphalt. Lena stepped outside quietly, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. Her brown hair was loosely tied, a few strands glowing copper under the neon light from the flickering sign above. She wore a faded grey sweater, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, revealing delicate wrists freckled with paint. "You're still here," she said softly, her voice nearly blending into the wind. Jack looked up and smirked faintly. "Couldn't sleep. The road keeps whispering in my head." She handed him the mug and sat beside him. The steps were cold, but she didn't mind. "What does it say?" "That I should have stayed on it," he muttered, his tone half joking but heavy underneath. For a long moment they sat in silence, the only sound the soft hiss of distant tires on wet pavement. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting them both in an otherworldly blue glow. Finally, Lena said, "You ever miss it? The drifting, the not belonging anywhere?" Jack took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Sometimes, when you're out there, the road becomes your only truth. No expectations, no past, no one to answer to. Just the wind and your heartbeat." He paused, eyes fixed on something far away. "But after a while, it gets lonely. The miles don't wash away what's behind you, they just stretch the silence." Lena studied him quietly. He rarely spoke this much about himself. Normally, his words came in grunts or short sentences, efficient as his work. But tonight, something in the stillness had opened a door. He let out a dry laugh. "You ever meet a man who thought the world owed him a childhood? That was me. When my mom left, I was 10. She'd had enough of my old man's drinking and fists. She told me she'd come back once she found a place for us. But she never did." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the mug, the motion slow and restless. "Dad worked nights at the freight yard. When he wasn't drinking, he was yelling. I learned how to fix bikes before I learned how to read properly, because if I stayed in the garage, he couldn't find me to hit." Lena's expression softened. "How old were you when he died?" Jack interrupted, half smiling. 18. Heart attack. I buried him myself, didn't shed a tear. Felt like I was supposed to, but there was nothing left." He leaned back against the wall, staring at the faint stars through the garage skylight. "After that, I hit the road, joined a club. Fights, noise, miles of bad decisions. I thought if I rode fast enough, maybe I'd leave that angry kid behind." His laugh this time was bitter. "Didn't work." Lena sat silently, fingers wrapped around her own mug. She understood more than he knew. Her own life, though different, carried its share of quiet scars, the kind that don't bleed, but ache on cold nights. Jack continued, voice lower now. "You asked me once why I helped you and your kid. Truth is, I don't really know. That night at the bakery, when I saw her face against the glass, it hit something in me I thought was dead. Maybe it was because I saw myself in her, or maybe it was because I saw my mother in you. The words hung there, heavy and fragile. Lena turned her head toward him, her green eyes shining faintly under the neon's flicker. You think your mother wanted to leave you? He hesitated, the question landing deep. For years, I hated her for it, thought she was a coward. But now, after seeing how hard you fight just to feed your kid, I think maybe she didn't have a choice. Maybe she thought she was saving me by staying away. Lena looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. Mothers never stop thinking of their children, even when they can't be with them. I know that kind of love. It's the kind that hurts. Jack's gaze lingered on her. There was no pity in it, only understanding. Two survivors, sitting shoulder to shoulder, each carrying ghosts the other could somehow see. He set the mug down, resting his arms on his knees. You know what's funny? I used to think kindness was a weakness, that if you cared about anyone, they'd just walk away or get taken from you. But that night, watching Ellie in the rain, I realized it's the opposite. It takes strength to care when the world keeps giving you reasons not to. Lena smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. Then maybe you're stronger than you think. Jack looked away, uncomfortable with praise. Nah, I just got tired of being angry. For a while, they said nothing. The world outside was asleep, and the garage felt like its own small universe, a sanctuary made of grease, neon, and second chances. Finally, Lena broke the silence. Jack, do you ever wonder what your mother would say if she saw you now? He exhaled, slowly, his expression softening. She'd probably laugh. Say I turned out just like my old man, loud bike, bad coffee, too many regrets. I don't think so, Lena said gently. I think she'd be proud. You took the hurt she gave you and made something good out of it. Jack turned to her then, eyes meeting hers under the fading neon light. Maybe, or maybe I'm just trying to do what she didn't, pull someone else out of the rain before it's too late. Lena didn't answer, but the way she looked at him said enough. Gratitude, admiration, and something deeper neither dared name. Inside, the bulb above the workbench flickered, then dimmed. Jack stood and extended a hand toward her. Come on. You'll catch cold sitting out here. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His palm was rough, warm, steady. They walked back inside, side by side, their shadows long and parallel across the concrete floor. As Jack switched off the final light, the garage sank into darkness. Save for the faint glow from the painted tank on his bike, the fiery wings reflecting just enough light to paint the walls in gold and crimson. For a long moment, the two of them stood there, silent but understood. No words were needed, no promises. Just two wounded souls, bound not by romance but by recognition, the kind of bond forged only in the quiet, after the storm. Spring came to the city in the quietest way, not with fanfare or parades of color, but with a slow thawing of the streets and the soft return of sunlight that lingered longer each evening. The Iron Wings garage, once a cavern of noise and oil, now carried a new scent, the faint tang of paint thinner and lacquer mixed with the eternal perfume of gasoline. It was a strange harmony, but somehow it fit perfectly. Months had passed since that quiet night when Jack and Lena sat under the neon light and shared their ghosts. In that time, the garage had changed, though no one could say exactly when the shift happened. Maybe it was when the first painted tank left the shop. Maybe it was when word began to spread, stories whispered at biker bars and roadside motels about a woman who could make a Harley's heart burn with wings of fire. Lena had become something of a legend in her own right. She was still humble, still quiet, but her work spoke louder than any introduction could. She'd set up a small studio in one corner of the garage, a space cordoned off with sheets of canvas and lit by a tall window that caught the morning sun. The walls were a patchwork of sketches, test panels, and color charts, splattered with crimson, gold, and smoke gray. She wore a denim apron most days, streaked with the ghosts of 100 colors. Her hair, now grown longer, was tied into a low ponytail, strands escaping to dance around her face as she worked. There was something unspokenly graceful about her, the way her wrist moved with absolute control, the way her eyes narrowed in focus, as if every brushstroke was a heartbeat. Ellie, now 6, had taken her own place in this small kingdom. She'd become her mother's little apprentice, mixing paints with solemn concentration, though her hands were usually more colorful than the canvas. Sometimes she'd hum quietly while stirring the pigments, a tune only she seemed to know. The bikers adored her. They called her the Little Flame. Jack watched it all from a distance, his usual place by the doorway or leaning against his Harley. His presence was constant but never intrusive. He'd handle the business side orders, deliveries, clients, while ensuring no one in the rougher corners of the biker world ever bothered Lena or her daughter. When word spread too fast and the orders piled high, he'd be the one to sort them, keeping the vultures and scammers away. There were many who came to see the angel painter, men with arms covered in ink, women with leather jackets heavy with pins and stories. Some were gruff and silent, others loud and brash, but all of them left quieter than they came. It wasn't just about the art, it was what it made them feel. Lena painted not just designs, but pieces of soul wings, flames, storms, memorials for lost brothers, symbols of rebirth. One afternoon, a new customer arrived, a tall man named Caleb Strickland. He was in his 40s, his frame lean but tense, like a bow drawn to breaking. His hair was black, streaked with iron gray, his beard trimmed close, and his eyes sharp as flint. His jacket bore a patch reading Iron Dogs MC, a club known across 3 states for its fierce reputation. Caleb walked with the limp of an old wound, the kind that spoke of both pride and pain. Jack met him at the entrance. "You here for paint or repairs?" Caleb's voice was gravelly. "Paint. Memorial job. For a brother we lost." He pulled a folded photograph from his pocket, a young man smiling beside a Harley, sunlight glinting off his helmet. "Name was Reese. He was my kid brother." Jack nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. "Lena handles that kind of work." Inside, Caleb hesitated when he saw her, a woman with paint on her hands and warmth in her eyes, so different from the world he came from. He watched silently as she studied the photo, her fingers tracing the outline of the bike in it. "What do you want it to say?" she asked quietly. Caleb cleared his throat. He used to talk about flying, said the road felt like wings under his wheels. Maybe something like that. Lena nodded. "I think I understand." For the next 3 days, she worked in silence. Caleb visited often, watching her paint, always with the same rigid stance, arms folded across his chest, as if afraid to show what he felt. On the final day, when the paint dried and she turned the tank under the light, his composure cracked. Across the metal shimmered a pair of storm-grey wings, unfolding from a single flame, with a faint engraving at the base. "Ride on, Reese." Caleb's voice broke when he whispered, "He'd have loved it." Jack stood nearby, saying nothing, but his expression carried quiet pride. The moment Lena handed Caleb the finished work, something unspoken passed between them, that mutual respect between warriors who understood loss. When Caleb left, he shook Jack's hand firmly. "You've got something special here," he said, nodding toward Lena's corner. "Protect it. The world eats beauty alive if you let it." Jack's answer was simple. "That's what I'm here for." That night, after closing, Jack helped Lena carry finished tanks into the storage room. They stacked them carefully along the walls, each one gleaming under the fluorescent light wings. Skulls, phoenixes, prayers, storms. "You realize," he said, brushing dust from his hands, "your name's spreading faster than any engine we've tuned." She smiled wearily. "It's not my name, it's the work. People see themselves in it." He tilted his head. "No, they see hope. She didn't argue. Instead, she glanced toward the front door, where Ellie was curled up on an old couch, asleep with a paintbrush still in her hand. "Sometimes," Lena said softly, "I think she's the real artist. I just follow her light." Jack looked at the sleeping girl, then back at Lena. "You're building something that's gonna last," he said. "Not just paint and metal a place. A home." He wasn't exaggerating. The garage had evolved beyond its mechanics. Riders who stopped by didn't just come for service. They came for the atmosphere, the strange calm that had settled into the place. Someone had hung a small wooden sign near the front door, carved by Miguel and burned with Jack's lighter to darken the edges. It read, "Lena's Art Garage, where steel finds its soul." It became more than a slogan. It was truth. By midsummer, orders poured in from neighboring states. Photos of her work began appearing in biker magazines. One writer from Road Nation Monthly came to interview her, Dana Culver, a young woman in her early 30s with short-cropped blonde hair and ink-stained fingers, from her notebook. She was sharp, confident, and curious, the kind of journalist who listened more than she talked. "You don't fit the image people have of a biker artist," Dana said during the interview. "Most expect tattoos and attitude." Lena smiled gently. "Maybe because I paint for people, not machines." When the article published a few weeks later, it was titled "The Angel of Iron Wings." Orders doubled overnight. Jack handled the chaos with quiet efficiency. He brought in extra hands, arranged deliveries, and made sure Lena never saw the uglier side of the biker business, the rivalries, the debts, the men who came looking for favors. To them, he was still the Hell Angel, the man whose reputation kept trouble at bay. But to Lena and Ellie, he was just Jack, the man who fixed what others broke. Every evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, the garage glowed in golden light. Paintbrushes clinked in jars, engines hummed low, and laughter drifted across the lot. It wasn't perfect, life never was, but it was whole. And for the first time in years, Jack Lawson, the man who had outrun everything he'd ever known, realized he had finally arrived somewhere worth stopping. The day of Ellie's 7th birthday broke beneath a clear blue sky, the kind that seemed to stretch forever, washed clean by last night's spring rain. Morning sunlight poured through the high windows of Iron Wing's garage, glinting off chrome and glass like scattered stars. The scent of oil, coffee, and fresh paint mingled in the air, a strange but comforting perfume that had long become the smell of home. Lena stood in her small studio corner, brushing her hands free of paint flecks, a faint smile curling her lips as she looked around. The garage had changed in ways she could hardly believe. The concrete floor that once echoed only with clanging tools and the hiss of welding now carried laughter, music, and warmth. There were potted plants by the entrance that Ellie had insisted on keeping, though they gathered dust faster than sunlight. Near the front door hung a small bell that jingled whenever a customer came in, its sound soft, almost domestic, something unthinkable in a biker's den a year ago. Jack Lawson was at the far end, working on a Harley with the patience of a craftsman who had finally found peace in repetition. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing sinewed forearms streaked with grease, and his once wild beard was now neatly trimmed. He looked calmer these days, older, yes, but also lighter, as though some invisible weight had finally slipped from his shoulders. He glanced up when Lena called out, "You're not planning to pretend you forgot what day it is, are you?" Jack grinned, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'd never survive the wrath of a 7-year-old. Lena chuckled, shaking her head. "Smart man." Ellie had been up since dawn, buzzing with excitement. She wore a small denim jacket embroidered with a pair of painted flames, a gift from Miguel, who'd spent 2 weeks secretly working on it in the back room. Her golden hair was tied in 2 uneven braids, and her cheeks glowed with that uncontainable energy only children possessed. By noon, the garage had transformed into something between a biker rally and a family picnic. Balloons, all black and orange, of course, floated near the ceiling beams. Miguel manned the grill outside, flipping burgers and humming along to an old Spanish tune. Tommy Briggs had rigged up fairy lights between the tool racks, while Hank had taken on the role of birthday bouncer, standing by the cake table to make sure no one stole frosting before the candles were lit. Ellie ran between the bikes, chased by old Ben's small shepherd mix, a grey-muzzled dog named Roxy. The dog had been astray once, limping into the garage one rainy night months ago, ribs showing and eyes wary. Jack had fed her, and since then she had never left. Roxy was gentle now, with a coat of mixed silver and tan, and she adored Ellie fiercely, following her everywhere like a shadow made of fur. The crowd that day was a wild mix, rough bikers with tattoos and road scars, wives and girlfriends in leather vests, a few kids playing tag with grease-stained hands. But despite their rugged looks, the laughter that filled the air was pure and unguarded. It was a celebration not just of a child's birthday, but of something far rarer, redemption. When the clock struck 3, Miguel clapped his hands for attention. "All right, familia, time to sing!" Ellie stood in front of the cake, eyes wide, her small hands clasped in front of her chest. The cake itself was imperfect, slightly lopsided, with uneven lettering that read, "Ride free, little flame." But to her, it might as well have been a masterpiece. Jack dimmed the lights, and the garage glowed under the warm shimmer of candles. For a moment, silence fell, the kind of stillness that makes a memory. Lena stood behind her daughter, her hands resting gently on the girl's shoulders. Jack stood beside them, his shadow tall against the wall. "Make a wish, kiddo," Miguel said softly. Ellie closed her eyes, her lashes fluttering like small wings. She didn't speak, but a tiny smile appeared, secret and sincere. Then she blew. The candles flickered out, smoke curling upward like whispers to heaven. Applause and cheers erupted. Someone revved a bike engine in celebration, and laughter broke through the noise. After the chaos settled, Lena found herself standing near the workbench, staring at the wall above it. Hanging there, encased in a simple wooden frame, was the first tank she'd ever painted, the one Jack had given her that day so long ago. The once fiery reds had dulled with time, the black softened to charcoal, but it was still beautiful. The angel wings looked worn, like they had flown through years of wind and dust, and somehow that made them even more alive. Jack joined her quietly, his hand brushing a smudge from the frame. "You remember how nervous you were painting that thing?" he said with a half-smile. Lena laughed softly. "I remember thinking you'd sand it off the second you saw it." "I almost did," he admitted. "But then I realized it was the first thing in a long time that made me stop running." She looked up at him, the golden light from the bulbs tracing his face in soft lines. "Running from what?" "Everything," he said simply. "My past, the noise, the emptiness. You and that kid showed me there's more to life than just miles and regrets." He turned to her then, his grey-blue eyes steady, the kind of gaze that could both disarm and anchor a person. "You didn't just fix my bike, Lena," he said, voice low. "You fixed me." She blinked, emotion rising unbidden. Her throat tightened, but she managed to whisper, "No, Jack. You're the one who brought the light back." For a long heartbeat, they stood there, two people who had once been broken pieces of separate stories, now fitting quietly into one. Then, before either could speak, Ellie ran up, giggling breathlessly. "Come on! They're starting the races outside." She tugged at both their hands. "We're a family, remember? Families don't miss the fun." Jack and Lena exchanged a glance that said everything words couldn't. He ruffled Ellie's hair, chuckling. "All right, little flame, lead the way." Outside, the setting sun painted the world in gold and fire. The bikers lined up their Harleys in 2 neat rows, engines roaring like thunder rolling through the valley. Someone hoisted Ellie onto Jack's bike, placing a tiny helmet over her braids. She squealed with delight as Lena climbed on behind them. The crowd cheered when Jack started the engine. The roar was deep and alive, echoing through the lot. As they pulled out, the wind caught Lena's hair, streaming it behind her like a banner of freedom. Ellie's laughter rose above the engines, a sound purer than any music. They rode toward the horizon, the sky aflame with orange and red, the road stretching endless before them. Behind them, the garage lights shimmered a beacon for all the lost souls who might one day find their way home. And if someone watching had asked who they were, the answer would have been simple. Not bikers, not painters, not drifters, just a family, forged from kindness, healed by love, and bound by the open road. Sometimes angels don't need wings. Sometimes they wear leather and carry the scent of gasoline. Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't written in the skies or shouted from church walls. They happen quietly, in the hands that lift others, in the kindness that turns strangers into family, in the light that appears when all hope seems lost. Maybe that's how God works, through simple people, through second chances, through love that asks for nothing in return. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that grace still walks among us. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless you and every road you travel.